Ke ngā kahiko te Nehenehenui, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome to another engaging Te Puna Kōrero o te Nehenehenui, te whānau, on this chilly winter's evening, I might add, and it's been cold all day, but beautiful weather. I hope you guys are nice and warm where you are this evening. I'm your host for tonight, Leon Hemera, and I'll be navigating our kōrero throughout our kōrero this evening. If you didn't know already, te whānau, and I see it's everywhere, all over social media, all over the news, and it's in the air. It is Matariki. Matariki has risen, and it's a beautiful time of the year. A lot of our whānau are celebrating right now, and a lot of our whānau are just learning. So tonight, it's a bit of a kōrero and a bit of a learning as well, and Matariki is going to be the kaupapa. And I must say, I'm really privileged to have my tuakana back tonight. And we've had him on here many times, but we've got the man back. Tiriana, tēnā koe taku tuakana, e mihi ana kia koe. How are you?
Tēnā rau koe, Leon. Ai, kei te ora rawa atu. I'm doing good, my bro. How are you too?
Ka pai, I'm very good. Is it cold where you are this evening?
It's not too cold here, but I hear it's very cold where you are, bro.
It's almost Antarctica here in the Nehenehenui, my bro. So I'm glad you're warm where you are. Bro, for some of our whānau out there that are watching, some of them are long-time watchers, first-time callers could be. So for those that have just tuned in just recently, if we could do a ko ai koe e nowhia koe.
Ai, tēnā rā tātou. No meki, te Nehenehenui whānui ahau. He uri tēnei hoki no Waikato, ko ngā hapu o tēnei, ko Ngāti Pēhi, Ngāti Te Kanawa, Ngāti Kōrero, Ngāti Mahuta, I nā te huhua hoki o ngā hapu, ngā hononga hapu oku. Ko Tiriana Anderson tōku ingoa. Kia ora.
Nā koe taku tuakana, must be from the West, eh? The West is the best as well. Nice to have you again there, my bro. First of all, bro, tell me how's your week been this week? Have you had much Matariki activity going on for you?
A lot of Matariki activities going on there, cuz. It's been a very busy week, let's say. It's refreshingly busy. It's busy in the sense that it's Te Ao Māori is very busy and buzzing at this time. So yeah.
Yeah, I must say it's probably the most buzziest that I've ever seen Matariki this year. It's been definitely big everywhere, not only here in Aotearoa, but all over the world. So yeah, it's been a definite shift, I think. So it's good. It's definitely a good thing. But bro, to kick us off, let's sort of go back to the starts. Me myself, I never really was brought up knowing Matariki at all, and recently have just been started to learn about it actually, along with a lot of my nieces and nephews. They're teaching me now at the moment. So, for you, bro, how did it all start? Were you brought up knowing mātauranga, Matariki, and stuff like that? How did it start for you?
I think the best way for me to explain how it all started for me, bro, is that I couldn't speak Te Reo Pākehā, so I couldn't actually speak or understand English until quite later on in my childhood. I think I was around 7 or 8 before I could speak English and read English, all those sorts of things properly. So essentially what I'm getting at is that everything that I understood as a tamaiti and as a child was mātauranga Māori, was Te Ao Māori. And that's thanks to both my parents, my mother and my father. But with this knowledge of Maramataka and Matariki and different whetū within our universe, that's actually come from growing up on the West Coast and also growing up in Te Nehenehenui. And for me, it's been my father that's taught me a lot of the kōrero that I know to this day, and it's also been a handing down of knowledge from my different tupuna in their different tuhinga that they left behind in our whānau. But mainly, is that the way that knowledge was passed down from my father would not be identified by normal people as mātauranga Maramataka or mātauranga Māori. because my father talked about Maramataka and Matariki and the different stars in relevance to kai. It was always relevant to kai. And it was around Mahinga Kai. Those were the marama, and the different stars in the sky were his compass per se, and his GPS me ki into Mahinga Kai. And one of the examples I can give of my father actually teaching about the Maramataka and the different whetū is actually when you go floundering. Um, and this is actually key to unlocking a lot of our knowledge within whānau in Te Nehenehenui, is that our knowledge is it's gone through a phase of it's gone from Māori and it's been translated into Te Ao Pākehā, and then now we're trying to read it again Māori. And what I mean by that is an example of my father teaching me about the Maramataka was later on in life, was when I was around 10 years old and we were going floundering. And Dad would always tell us that, that you look to the moon to actually guide you when you're doing mahinga moana, doing mahinga kai or tangaroa. And he'd always talk about the Pātiki and the marama being connected, that if the marama was out and it was too bright, that wouldn't be a good time to go out. Ki te haere rama I ngā Pātiki. And Dad would say that there's too much light, just little things like that. You don't want to go out in the full moon because there's too much light. And the other ways that he described the marama was that there were different shapes that the marama would sit in the sky, and depending with the crescent moon, if it was sitting, for example, like that on the horizon, that's a tohu ka ua, he ua kei te haere. Mena e noho pēnei ana if it was sitting like this, he tohu, ko ngā rā e haere mai ana, is the days that are coming are actually good days. And why I'm focusing on the Maramataka is because Matariki, and you'll hear this a lot, is that Matariki is used to read and to look into what harvest and what kai and all these different aspects of our environment will look like in the future. For example, will there be an abundance of fish? Will there be an abundance of these different things? And if you were to get a reading, for example, from Waiti, which represents freshwater, that there would be an abundance of kai, an abundance of freshwater kai, is you'd actually look to the Maramataka. My father always told me that you'd look to the moon to actually tell you which days specifically throughout your year it is actually good for fish water. And that's where Matariki, Maramataka, and all the other elements of our taiao, like the birds, they actually come together. And growing up in Te Nehenehenui, that's how I saw it. I saw it all together. We always talked about the middleberries, and when they, and when they're out, and that's when the Kōrero is, really, really fat, and that's when you want to leave them alone. But those are just different narratives that are passed around in Te Nehenehenui as our manu. And then you look at those different tohu that the manu give us, and if you take a reading from Matariki, the manu can actually direct to you when it's a good time to go out and pick berries. When the Kōrero are flying around flopping very, very hard, because you can actually identify different manu through the sounds of their wings. But see, this is how I tend to go off kaupapa. E hoki ana ki ngā huatanga e tohu nei, that these are actually directing to, is Matariki. Right now, there is an emphasis on Matariki and the Kōrero. Like I thank those that are out there and that have been champions for this kaupapa, for Matariki, and different kaupapa o Te Ao Māori. And one of the champions that I actually genuinely mihi from my heart is kia koe e te tākuta e rangi mātāmua. He's actually opened up opportunities for us as iwi, individual iwi, to express now our kōrero about Matariki, because he's done very well in opening the kōrero of Tūhoe and his kaumātua, and now it's our time to feel empowered to talk about our own. And one of ours is actually that we look at puanga. You know, puanga is very, very important to us. He tohu o te tauhau ki a mātou, o te nehenehenui and te tauhauaru. So for the West Coast in te nehenehenui, we look at puanga as being one of our signs of the Māori New Year for us. But that is because you have, like I was saying, you've got to take everything in together. So you take the rising of Matariki, and then you take the rising of puanga. So puanga, they both come together and will actually signify to you the beginning and the end of the celebrations for when you celebrate Matariki. Well, then that's how I've understood Matariki. And the celebrations of Matariki is that they take part between those two elements in the rising of each.
Can you just tell us what's the difference between Matariki and puanga, like as in the actual stars themselves? And where they are?
I see. This is my raru. Is my English is not the greatest. I can never remember the name of puanga. I think it's Sirius. I'm just making up names now, and all the different star names are going through my mind at the moment. But Matariki and puanga, they are completely different constellations. Okay, Matariki actually sits quite far ahead, and puanga is somewhat back lower of Matariki. Oh, look at me pointing like we can all see on my screen where this is where my presentation would have helped. Engari. Is that so Matariki is a constellation in kia mātou o Maniapoto. It is the tauihu of te waka o Tainui. Okay, and one of the stories that was handed to me is that when Hoturua passed, in the time that Hoturua and Rakataura passed, they ascended up and followed the same path that Tāne did from Aotearoa up into te waka o Tainui. And ki reira, that's where kia mātou, ko Hoturua kē tēnā e haere ana ki te rangi. It's Hoturua that is up there in te waka o Tainui going around our sky collecting our different people. But then it's not only him, because we place all of our different ariki and all of our different tupuna on that waka, helping support our different whetū and our different constellations that are carrying our different mate across that sky. And I think back to one of the kōrero around this entire waka, and is that, so when we go back to the te tīmatanga mai, te ōroko tīmatanga o te ao, okay, mai te kore. So from te kore, there are mai te kore tainoa ki te ao marama. Each of those different paparanga of our whakapapa hold different stories. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now within te kore you have, that's the absolute nothingness, the complete void. And mai te kore ka puta ki te pō. Okay, there are many levels within te kore, and within te kore you have different stories. I'm not going to touch on those ones. This is how Tiriana veers off. Now, when you ka tahuri atu mai te kore ki te pō, and that's when you realize the absolute nothingness is something, and that something is darkness, and this is where our stories begin, is with Matariki, begin in te pō. And ki roto i te pō is where Ranginui and Papatuanuku are held in their tight embrace, okay? And Ranginui and Papatuanuku, in their tight embrace, in between them are their tamariki. And they are causing an environment, because of this embrace, the environment that their tamariki are living in is extremely hot. It is extremely challenged. There is no space to move for their tamariki. But Tāne, what Tāne does is he discovers between his mother's kuwha is that there is a ara, there is a path that he follows, and it's a deep cold that leads him, okay, into this path, and it's between his mother's kufa, and he goes between his mother's kufa and he ends up outside of his parents' embrace. Okay, and while he's outside, and he takes along with him a few of his siblings, and while they're outside of their parents' embrace, they realize the potential of the area and the space that they are currently in. And that is when Tāne looks to his siblings and says, we could populate this area. This could be ours. This entire nothingness could be ours. And that's when the deep cold just comes in and it just grabs them. And once they feel that deep cold outside of their parents' embrace, they hurry back in. And this is when Tāne looks at his siblings and he calls a meeting with his siblings, and he says to his siblings, maybe we need to separate our parents, okay? And this separation of our parents will keep a warmth between us and allow us to live in this nothingness and travel around in this nothingness and populate this area, okay? And for us in Maniapoto, this story is very much so relevant to we have kōrero about sacred symbols within tainui waka whānui. Okay, and these sacred symbols, one of them is the takarangi. And the takarangi actually describes this movement of ranginui and papatuanuku around the entire universe. That's one way we look at the takarangi. And the takarangi is a double helix spiral. Te rāhuatanga o te rauru. And so ranginui and so Tāne suggests to his siblings that they separate their parents. Now you will understand that there are different versions of this kōrero out there. And the different versions, they say that it was all the siblings that agreed to these two ranginui and papatuanuku being separated, and then there are kōrero that say that one of the siblings did not agree to the separation of ranginui and papatuanuku, and that was Matariki. And then you hear a kōrero, which is the one that I grew up with, is that there were 3 atua that did not accept the separation of ranginui rawa ko papatuanuku. And those 3 atua, to me, that I've grown up knowing was Uru, Tāwhiri Mātea, and one of them also was Whiro. He was another atua that did not accept the separation of ranginui and papatuanuku. And after Tāne, so Tāne, I don't know if we've all heard the kōrero, but I'll go through it, is that after Tāne has the wānanga with his siblings, they decide, those 3 siblings, they disagree with the separation of ranginui and papatuanuku. And when you look at ranginui and papatuanuku, they were separated. Tāne went to Kurawaka kia mātou, okay, to me. That's what I was told, is that I tai atu ia ki Kurawaka. And ki Kurawaka was there that he actually laid on his shoulders and pressed up on his parents. And why this is actually important in our kōrero is that I've grown up knowing that this point in Kurawaka where Tāne pushed off was actually in the pelvic region. It was in the pelvic region of ranginui and papatuanuku that he pressed his parents apart. Okay, and his parents, they were still, their closest point that I've grown up knowing is that ranginui and papatuanuku, their heads are closest, okay, their heads and their feet, and that is the horizon. You look around, that's the northern or the southern horizon. It doesn't matter which direction you're looking, that is always, ko tōna mātenga, ko tōna ringaringa, one side, and his feet that they're touching. It's these things that are there. Yeah, those are the edges to us. And that created a space between our 2 parent atua for these siblings to coexist. And that gave Tāne a connection point to go up into ngā rangi tūhaha. Because when you look at when you look at the kōrero of tāne going up into the sky from our perspective of te Nehenehenui that I've grown up with, and this has come from also my nan, is that tāne, he ascended into the heavens using a puna wai, he puna wai. Okay, and this puna wai is where the sun, where te rā settles into at night and bathes, okay, and heats up the water in that puna. And that is actually the puna that tāne went into to ascend up into the heavens. And this puna, so if you look at so let's imagine that this is the horizon and my hand is the sun. Now, the sun is rising out of the horizon, and if you actually look, there's a space between those two, okay? And in between that is the puna that I'm speaking of. And this is where tāne went and traversed down into this puna wai, ngā wai a tāne, and up into the heavens, placing the different stars into the sky. Now, ka rongo, this is where the similarities occur between our stories, the stories that I've grown up with, and the stories that I'm now hearing of Matariki. And it's warming to me, is that tāne placed all of the different stars into the sky once he ascended up into Ngā Rangi Tūhaha. And once he placed the different stars into the sky, there was actually a particular karakia that not karakia. Well, actually, he momo karakia, because there's different knowledge systems that kua ngaro I nei rā. And that is that there were karakia that used, we had different tohunga that had their tuahu were their ringa, okay? And these are the karakia that I'm talking about. This is the karakia that tāne did, because he was one of those atua. His tuahu was wherever he was. And while he was up there and he was placing all of these different stars into the sky, ka tuku ia I tēnei momo karakia, and this karakia was so resounding and so, how do you put it, immense, that it shook, okay? And this shaking to us went from the sky down, it went from Ranginui, it was between Ranginui and Papatuanuku, and ka oho marika, and that is when Ruaumoko woke up. Okay, and Ruaumoko started kicking up a stink because he saw, he could feel that his parents were now separated. Okay, this was the point that Ruaumoko knew that his parents were separated now, and he was another atua. Sorry, there was four. He was another atua that didn't agree with the separation of their parents. But in that time that tāne was up in the heavens doing that haka, doing that karakia, ka oti tana karakia, his karakia was finished, and without him realizing, he had actually tipped over and let out all of his ika, mai tōna, his fish started, because those were kia mātou, those were the last things for tāne to take out of his kete and place was te Pātiki. Because to us that I've grown up on the West Coast, there is te Pātiki, which sits just outside of the Milky Way, and that, when you can see te Pātiki, that is the time you go floundering. And that is usually when it's not too bright. The sky is not too bright, there's not too much light in the sky, and those stars that make up te Pātiki are showing. And and that's when tāne's ka puta katoa, that's when all of his different ika started coming out, and ka puta ko te inanga, ko te tuna, because these were constellations these are constellations for us that are actually sticking out of te mangaoroa, so the Milky Way. The Milky Way is said to be te kete nui a tāne or te ika nui a tāne, kia mātou o te mangaoroa. And that's the last, and te mangaoroa was the one that got stuck and that just didn't come out of the kete, and that's the one that is stuck up there to this day. Kia
Mm,
mātou. Mm.
man, because I'm just blown away by all the knowledge that you have, and yeah, you're real fortunate to grow up with all of that kōrero, bro. That was obviously handed down to you by your parents, your nan,
Different.
and all of your whānau, bro. So yeah, definitely ngā tino taonga i ra
Mm.
kōrero. Was it mātauranga that was shared widely within your whole whānau, or not
Ka.
widely whānau?
Actually, let me put it this way, cuz the in-depth understanding of the knowledge was not widely distributed. So, for example, my siblings also, there's 4 in my whānau. All of my siblings can go out and do mahinga kai via the stars, via the Maramataka, ngā tohu o te taiao, ngā tātai arakapua. So those are the different signs of the environment. So the birds, the fish, even the murkiness of the water, because these different elements and those things all work together. So my siblings, they know how to go out. They can go out and fill a sack with kina, and they can go out and fill a fish bin with pātiki. They can go out and fill a hinaki with tuna, or go and fill lines with tuna, and all these different things based on the maramataka. Okay, but my father, so there was dad. He'd always taught us about mahinga kai, but he only sat down with me, and this is something that me and my siblings we always talk about, and is that dad actually took time to sit down with me and tell me the stories that was behind the reason, not so much the stories, it was the reasons behind why you use the moon. Because to him, there were practical reasons and pragmatic reasonings behind not going out during a full moon, going out during a quarter moon. Yeah, because the understanding, like once you actually get into it, because I don't want to take us into a rabbit hole. That's what I've been trying to stay off. Is
Ai
that you
ana.
actually you start to realize that with mātauranga Māori is that it's actually a science. Okay, it is a deep science. For example, our understanding of Pleiades is very in depth, and Pleiades is Matariki, sorry, is one of the most recorded constellations in the entire, in all cultures, in all human cultures around the world. But when you look at how much more understanding we have of our entire environment as a whole, I mean, right down to the separation of Ranginui and Papatuanuku being a homage to the creation of the ozone layer, for example. Tane being the god of plant life, and in fact being plant life that took in all the carbon within our planet at its early stages and turned it into oxygen, pressing the carbon out into the outer layers of the atmosphere, causing the ozone layer.
Mm.
Separation of Ranginui and Papatuanuku. There are different kōrero, like there are myths within Te Ao Māori. They call them myths. I've got an uncle within our whānau that actually told me that there's a myth and then there's a story. For example, when you look at the Maui stories, you have, here's the quick example, is you have the story of Maui slowing down the sun, okay? And I don't know how to put this without sounding, but put it this way, it's winter right now,
Ai.
here in Aotearoa. And it gets dark around 5:30, give or take. If you and I, Leon, if we were to jump on a waka haurua and go all the way up to Hawaii, it wouldn't be winter up there, it would be summer. And
Ai.
we know that in our summer days, our days can go until 9:30 at night. And when you think of it like that, the slowing down, Maui slowing down the sun, and thinking about the winter solstice and daylight saving and these different environmental factors that we actually live with today, there are stories behind our myths. Maui, you know, the the kohanga, the puka puka version that we hear is he took the rope, tēnei taura, and he threw it around Tamanui Te Rā and he pulled him and slowed him down. Okay? But you go and talk to a voyager will tell you, well, you sail from this end and you go up, this end south up to north, you'll slow the sun down by about 5 or 6 hours. Maui slowing the sun down. And then you have the kōrero of Maui fishing up Aotearoa. If you've never been in the open ocean and you've never seen land right out of the ocean, then you'd never understand that description of fishing Aotearoa out of the ocean. And there's unlocking of knowledge. I mean, this is why I love that Matariki is at the center point. I know I should be talking about Matariki, but I want everyone else to actually go home and think, well, you're already at home, is actually think about what did my dad, what did my uncle, what did my nan tell me? Don't go down to the water. Don't go over there. Don't touch these at this certain time. Don't go up there at this certain time. He haue pupuhi ana. All these different environmental factors come together with Matariki. Okay, so we can all go out there and we can all go and learn about Matariki, but then we can also reassess our Māori worldview, because we all, if you are Māori, your view of this world is Māori. Okay. If you are Māori, your mātauranga that you have up here is Māori. This is the reality of being Māori. We have that privilege, is that we have our own understandings that are held in quite high regard.
And Kaz, I'll go back to your point of learning those things you were taught when you were young. And to be honest, I was a haututu kid, and I was we used to go out eeling and floundering as well, with my uncles and stuff, and they used to teach us this knowledge too. But I was too haututu. I went one in one ear and went straight out the other. All I wanted to do was get down to the awa and just start throwing spears, throwing gas. But now, being an adult and being at this stage of my life, I really wish that I really listened and took in that knowledge, because like you said before, it's a science. And when you're young, you only want to listen to myths and legends where Maui threw a rope and captured the sun. If you tried to learn the whole science behind it now, that we know now, back then, it wouldn't work. So me as an adult now, just learning those things, bro, is huge. But you as very young, and it sounds like your papa seen something in you that you would retain that knowledge. Why do you think he chose you rather than they must have seen something in you, cousin, because you've got a whole lot of knowledge. What do you reckon? Why do they think they chose you to retain this knowledge?
Cuz my sister and I, we were actually talking about this just last night without a word of lie. She says to me, she goes, "You actually doomed before you were born, because I think this was mum and dad's plan, was to make, because when you have kids, you want to make right on your decisions with your kids. And like my dad, like how we described it is, with our upbringings, is our oldest brother, oh well, he's the protector, that's what he was taught. The next brother, oh well, he's the co-gatherer, that's what he was taught. Our sister, she's the Mother Hubbard, so all those different aspects. And then I look at myself and I go, so what's mine? And then my sister says to me, the hoha, the mohio, and I went, no, I'm the challenge in the whānau. No.
Every father's got to have their challenger, cousin. Everyone does. Me ana kia koutou e mātakitaki mai ana marunga, our Facebook, our Twitter, and our YouTube channels at home. Hope everybody's warm out there. Here's your chance. You guys can ask Tiriana some questions. Any questions that you have. The brother is a wealth of knowledge. Honestly, pick his brain like I do every single time I see him. I know. Put your questions in the live chat below in the Facebook, and we'll do our utmost best to ask Tiriana your fellows pātai. But bro, since we're talking about tūpuna, I want to talk about and ask the pātai, what were the things that our tūpuna used to do back in the day at this time of year, at Matariki time, because I heard some, I mean, comparison to other iwi, I hear some iwi they would fast during Matariki or when Matariki would rise. Is there anything that our tupuna used to do, like in that sort of sense, bro? Like throughout these days?
Definitely, cuz. So what I've been told, the different stories that I was told was is particularly about one of my kuia, uh, and it's around. It's actually directed at one of our whare wānanga cuz of Te Nehenehenui, and that's Miringa.
Mm.
And this fasting during Matariki, that's something she used to do. Not everybody would do it. So it's because the generalized kōrero that I was given of our area down home, down Te Nehenehenui, out Te Ahoroa, is that, you know, we did mahinga kai, we had orchards, we had mara, and that was, you know, that was the main function. And the purpose of Matariki that I've always known is that it's a coming together of your harvest. But let me put it this way: it's not only your mara kai harvest; it's whatever skills, whatever things you are good at. This is where you bring it to, okay, and where appreciation is shown towards it, and also is reciprocated to you. Um, and that's where this Matariki Hunganui, Matariki Ahunganui, era ahuatanga, different kōrero come from for us, within us. And the fasting, she would fast during the time of Matariki, okay? And this kōrero actually comes from another one of my uncles, because that's the other thing is I didn't only spend time with just my father, I spent time with many kaumatua, many of my aunties, uncles. And one of them, you know, e mihi ana ki tērā tūpuna o tātou, Uncle Phil Crown, tērā, that
Yep.
tohunga of ours that has kua ngaro. But he told me of a story of one of our tupuna kuia and how she would fast, and that during her time of fasting, it was important for her to not be distracted. And that's really what the purpose of that fasting was to ensure that the hunger was not a distraction to her wānanga, because she would read the stars for our whānau, for our hapu. So she was our tohunga mātai whetū, and she was the one that actually knew constellations quite in depth. That's where we understand that Miringa Te Kakara is actually, it's more than just a building, it's actually a piece of technology, and it's actually like a reverse projector almost. But yeah, moving on from that is that she would fast, and that would give her time to actually focus on the stars that she's reading. So for us, when we do our readings, because we're not only reading Matariki, we're also reading all the stars like Hine Takurua, through, and this is throughout, Hine Raumati, all of them throughout. And then you're also reading the different clouds, also cloud formations, cloud directions. We actually have names for them. There's Popo, there's Whare, there's Raurohe. There's all sorts of different names that we've given to them, but they're actually features of our planetary, how do I put it? Our environment that's here, not so much up in the clouds. And what that tells me, cuz, is that that's actually where we get the names for these things down on the ground, is from these things up here. And what I mean by that even further is that he tapu, there's actually a tapu, a sanctity with a lot of our different names and kupu associated with stars, associated with the marama. That tapu, I would say, is not so much prevalent these days. But for example, one of them that I could give you is colors, just the different colors that there's actually, in what I've grown up, my father telling me is that he grew up being told he wasn't allowed to say different colors. Okay, and this is all to do with our Maramataka, our whetū, because this is where they live. Okay, if you think of the colour blue, okay, blue being kahurangi or kikorangi, so kahu being kākahu or clothes, and rangi being ranginui, so kahurangi is the cloak of ranginui. Kikorangi is kiko, is, you know, it can be it's your meat or physical, I should say, not so much your physical, and kikorangi, so the te kiko orangi, his physical,
Yeah.
his being,
Wow.
and that's very tapu. Hey, that's very sacred, and those different colours were actually sacred. And why I'm saying this is because you'll find these different kōrero throughout your whānau. You know, you'll, because I've even got, you know, you've got those different aunties that can have their own versions of stories, and then you also have the same with uncles. They have their own versions of stories, but if you take the truth from them, you'll be able to unlock even further stories with other kōrero that's been passed.
It's like Da Vinci Code. You find the
Oh,
lock one and it unlocks another one, and then you find out. Like I remember, I'm getting kōrero when I was a teenager, and it, you know, it takes me 17 years to unlock the answer to that kōrero. Or you think about something that you were told, and then 17 years later, you're like, oh, that's what they were talking about. So
yes.
yeah, I understand that. I understand that 100. Cause yeah, thank you for that kōrero. We talked about the things that happen around this time of the year. What about say back in the Ra? What were the things that didn't happen around Matariki times? What were the things that our tupuna were like, nah, you don't do that this time of the year?
There was actually it's not only just this time of Matariki, cuz is this is how I know it, and this is where this tau utu kia hau that I've grown up with my understanding comes from. Okay, is that our way that we did pakanga? So pakanga didn't occur during the time of Hine Takurua. So during winter months, okay, there was no battles. Okay, no fighting. Only under extreme circumstances would a battle occur. Within Maniapoto, this is Te Waka, within Tainui, sorry, Te Waka o Tainui. And the practicality behind that is, you know, you look at, in the wintertime, you have Matariki, Te Timatanga o Te Tauhou Māori, the beginning of the Māori New Year. That is also a time when we mourn loss. And there's also a period in prior to Matariki, okay, prior to celebrating, this is actually when we celebrate Matariki. Sorry, I don't even think I mentioned that. Is Matariki is signified through its raising during the month, the end of June. It's between the end of June and the beginning of July, the very early beginning of July, so like the 1st to the 4th. It will fall between those times. Not so much forever, but into the predictable future. It will fall between the end of June and beginning of July, and that's the Matariki. That's when Matariki will rise. But when Matariki sets, which is an entire month before, when Matariki sets, and essentially what it is an adjustment of the position of the sun and Matariki in the sky, which makes it hard to see Matariki in the early morning. Okay, because she's appearing during the time that the sun's rays are causing too much light in the sky for you to be able to see her. So once that adjustment completes, she's on the, you know, she's, because it's the actually, I don't know if everybody realizes this, but the sun does not rise and set in the same position on the horizon throughout the year. It actually moves, it moves across the horizon. Now, in saying that, this is what we're waiting for is that, and also the change in position for the winter solstice, which is when the planet on its axis, I'm probably explaining way too much right now, but on its axis, 3-degree axis, there's all these different changes happening. And that's when Matariki slowly appears a month later after the sun blocks using his sunlight blocks, Matariki, where you're able to see Matariki in the sun, in the sky. Now, Matariki also moves because you've got Orion's belt
Aye.
at this end, which is the teapot.
Aye.
And then you'd have Matariki at this end, okay? And generally what occurs is Matariki will slowly set with her nose down. Te waka o Tainui will sit with his nose down, going down into the horizon, and then will eventually show nose coming up first, coming up again. And that coming up, the rising of, that's what we mean by the rising of Matariki, where Matariki rises after being gone for around a month. It's between 3 to 5 weeks that she's, kangaroia kia mātou. And in that time, because this is all relevant to what we don't do during this time, is that this is another reason why you don't have pakanga, okay, is because those that we lose in that time of the year, there's no waka to pick them up in the sky. That's another reason. So that's a whole month out that you don't fight within Tainui waka, okay? And then you've also got Matariki, which is the new year, the harvest, and also having a whole week of celebrating with whānau. And you're probably thinking, why is it a whole week? Why didn't they keep it to one day? Well, we didn't have cars, we didn't have all these different things back then, so we had to ensure this was the same as our tangihanga. Tangihanga did not run for 3 days in traditional times. I mean, we look at the tangi of Tāwhiao going for over, I think it was 3 to 4 weeks. There's tangihanga at minimum with a month, okay, in the 1800s. That's and and then another reason why you didn't have pakanga in that time is because food was scarce. Okay, food was scarce throughout the winter. We've just had our harvest. We need to ensure that kai is there for that, and which would mean that there's not much energy to be expended on unnecessary fighting. So our tupuna would say, kia mau ki tōriri. And then there's also kōrero, different, it's kei te tūnga mai o hine raumati. That was a kōrero that you would say to your enemy, which sounds like, I'll see you next week. But really, it's I'm gonna get you. To us in Tainui, that was a kōrero like that. I'm coming for you. Because it was in that time around Raumati and Koanga that we could fight whenever we wanted. So, hei te Raumati, I'm not going to see you until then. I don't want to look at you until we can fight. That's essentially what that was saying. I think you're off. Your mic's off, I think, cuz.
And it was a mean kōrero I was giving too, bro. You missed it just briefly. Our whānau are asking pātai in the comment box, so we'll have a look in our poke and see what our pātai is. And the first one is from Janea. Tēnā koe, Janea Waitere. And Janea's pātai is Tēnā kōrua. Tiriana, do you know any Maniapoto kōrero around the hautapu ceremony? Also, would you be keen to maybe facilitate in the future? Aroha nui kazis. Oh, pātai pai tēnā, nā Janea. Ai, he hato whakautu.
Well, see, I've grown up knowing hautapu as being umukohukohu. That was a name that I knew it as. And for me, that was actually, I'm going into an epiphany now that I had, was around the hautapu ceremony. So I've grown up knowing it as umukohukohu. Okay, it's a time when it's actually not a big hangi. And my dad always talked about it's there were main things that you wanted to put in your umukohukohu, okay? So for example, if you were inland, and this was because with my dad, his mum's from the west coast, was coastal, and his father was from inland. So he was able to share both versions of it with me, and he always told me that, well, if you were to do umukohu in te Nehenehenui, why would you put seafood in there?
Kia ora.
Why would you put seafood in there? Because ahakoa, even though that star is up there and that star is what helps you read those different elements of waita, they're not actually a part of our environment. So they're not a key part to our sustainability as a community, as a hapu, and all of that different thing within te Nehenehenui. So we would, that was one key thing for me growing up. Umukohukohu. Now, with the kupu hautapu, is that you actually hear that in the haka. Okay? I te koko ma, i te koko ma, ko te hautapu e rite ki te kainga matariki pakia. That's talking about te koko ma, which is te kohu, the steam. He rite ki te kainga, not the house or the home, te kainga, that's the what do you call it? The passive of kai. Kainga, kaingia. So rite ki te kainga a matariki pakia. Tapa reireia. Right there gives you instructions. In that haka that we all hear, that there gives you instructions on how to do an umukohukohu. Okay, it tells you that it's the hautapu. It is the steam that is the food that will feed Matariki. Okay, so when you have your little hangi to feed the stars, and you take that, well, I was going to say your potato sack off, and you might have a lid these days. You might got a flash one with a lid. You take your lid off, and all the steam comes rushing out. That is the kai that feeds Matariki. Okay, and the kai that you put into there is relevant to the different stars that we have with Matariki. Okay, and these stars, so you have Waiti, which is fresh water, Waita, which is salt water. You have Tupuanuku, which is kai that grows in ground, and then you have Tupuarangi, which is kai that grows outside of the ground, outside of Papatuanuku, but within Ranginui. So those are things like fruits. So your tomatoes, your listen to me, fruit, and I go and say the most thing one, tomato, oranges, whakanui, tupuarangi. And then you have waiti, which is fresh water. I think I went there, did I? Yeah. And then you have ururangi, which is associated with the winds and also associated with our different manu that are flying around, but it's not all manu, okay? Not all manu. Then you have Matariki, which is relevant to our, kia mātou o tēnei, this is what I've grown up with, is that Matariki is the all-rounder. Okay, Matariki is what will tell you the state of that entire kāhui whetū. Okay, it tells you the how do I put it? The quality of the reading that you can get. Okay, when you look at Matariki. And what I mean by this, okay, so one way that my dad and my uncle taught me to read Matariki is telling me a story is explaining Matariki, okay? And that is that they are the eyes, you hear that they are the eyes of Tāwhiri Mātea, okay? One is key. Now, two is that if you think of Tāwhiri Mātea being the one atua that did not want to see his parents separated, okay? And it was the separation of his parents that created these newfound enemies of his, and he crushes his eyes, throws them into the skies, okay? And now his eyes are up there, and he can still see with his eyes, okay? And this is why we use Matariki to read, okay? Is because you think about it. If you saw someone you just at that moment despised of, okay? Your
Mhm.
eyes would change, you'd get a glare in your eyes, you'd get a twitch in your face and everything. If you think about those of the constellation of Matariki being Tāwhiri Mātia's eyes, and think of it in that sense, okay? And that Tangaroa is Waita, those are his kids, and Tāwhiri Mātia is after him, okay? And then you go Tupuarangi, some of those are Tāne Tamariki, and then you go Tupuanuku, Rongo. These are they're all associated with different atua, and those different eyes are keeping watch on Tāwhiri Mātia's enemies. And every time they glimmer, we know that Tāwhiri Mātia has found them, and they're in abundance over there. Okay, so for example, when Waiti to us, because there's different names, so there's different names or different ways we explain light. Okay, and to us, light can be, a kupu, tawhito is tea. Okay, so tea. So for example, tea aho aho is a way that you describe stars, same as T Rama Rama, same as
Mm.
T Kappa Kappa. It's talking about the state of each of those lights. Okay, so T Aho Aho. So if you think of a Aho, you look at these stars that we have around us. Okay, most of them are in Rama. Okay, because they're just there, static. But when they get those, when you look at a star and it's got those lines coming off it, that's Te Aho Aho. That's a star that is, kei te Te Aho. So we all use these words interchangeably, Te Aho, Te Rama, Te Kapa, but they all mean different types of light. So Te Aho is when it's all spreading out, and you get those lines coming off it. And then Te Rama Rama is when it's going like this, is
Yeah.
when the stars are, they're pulsing. And T Kappa Kappa is that's when they're going like that. They're closing on and off. You see them twinkle like you see them just doing that in the sky now
Yeah.
and again. E kappa kappa ana. And those, you think of Tāwhiri Mātia and the different eye shapes that he would make. Okay, so if there was an abundance of Tangaroa's tamariki, then his eyes would be big, ka ti rama rama. Okay, that star would be ti rama rama ana. Okay, but if it was a year to watch for, like there could be an abundance of fish here, you might get a sprouting of different fish in Tangaroa. You might, instead of a good season of fish, instead of Ti Ramarama, Waita might actually be in its Tiaho phase, which is telling us that, okay, that there is actually a spread, that kai will not be in abundance, it will be spread. Okay, and by spread, I mean spread scarcely. Okay, and once you get into Ti Kappa Kappa, that's when this is where my father would tell me, when the good moons, because whenever those good moons are, if it's kappa kappa, that's when you know to go during those good moons. Okay, but if it's tirama, then it's just gonna, you just go and you'll get a kai.
Man, I'm downloading all of this data, bro. I'm putting it into this external hard drive of mine so I can keep all this knowledge. But we got one more. We'll have one more partai actually in the pauka from one of our whānau. This is from Lee. Tina kōrua. Hea te kōrero e pāna ki te paki o Matariki. Pai tēnā pātai.
I can actually, te paki o Matariki, I was taught was very tapu. Okay, that's what I've grown up with, te paki o Matariki. And unfortunately, I haven't actually, so the kōrero that I do have of te paki o Matariki is the generalized kōrero that everybody has out there, which is the coat of arms of our king. But there's because with te paki o Matariki, there's kōrero around te paki o Matariki being, it holds a lot of our sacred symbols. Okay, And within Te Paki o Matariki, and I'm talking about the coat of arms of the king, Tuheitia, pai mairiria ki te kiingitanga, tēnā koe e tō tātou kiingi Māori, is that because there were two tohunga, to my understanding and my knowledge, that were endorsed to design Te Paki o Matariki. And this was during the time of Tāwhiao. And these two tohunga actually held off designing Te Paki o Matariki for 2 years, okay? Essentially, and that's quite strong, when you think of it being our King Tāwhiao putting out the tono for these people ki te hanga I tēnei tohu mō te kingitanga, and Te Paki o Matariki which is what eventuated after those 2 years. And this is what I mean by tapu. There's a lot of tapu with Te Paki o Matariki. And for me, I still believe in all of that. And kia hau nei, you can actually find the kōrero for Te Paki o Matariki online. It's actually online. I know I could just probably say it, but I don't want to whakatapu our kōrero with that one. But kia mohio tātou, that's the history as I know it with Te Paki o Matariki, is that these two tohunga were directed by Tāwhiao to design Te Paki o Matariki. The reason why it actually took them those 2 years and why they held off so long is because of the designs that were actually within Te Paki o Matariki. So you actually see that there's, you have Matariki as the starters. Then you have the tikauka. Then you have the kieke. These are the different trees on either side. And then you have the different tupu. But then you also have the takarangi on the inside, which is what I was talking about this movement of ranginui and papatuanuku. And well, so everything that is in Te Paki o Matariki is what I talked about kind of tonight, how I was talking about the names of, for example, different cloud formations in the sky. They actually match the names of our different tree growth, different plant life that we have down on our planet. And then you also look at within Te Paki o Matariki, you had the takarangi, which within Tainui Waka, there were two very sacred stones that were brought over on Te Waka o Tainui, which was Rehutai and Hukatai. And that tohu that's within Te Paki o Matariki actually sits on one of those toka, which was taken out of Ahurei around 1780, and that's all of our Māori within Tainui Waka were removed from Ahurei. Okay, so that's something for us whānau, is that we didn't actually just all of a sudden forget where all of our Māori were. It was around the Hingakaka, the Battle of Hingakaka, that they disestablished Ahurei, which was the whare wānanga that was established by Rakataura and Hoturua when they came to Aotearoa and reconciled their take that they had between them. And it was within this whare wānanga that these different artifacts that are depicted in Te Paki o Matariki are actually that were held.
Kia ora tuakana. Thank you for that kōrero, and I hope that answers your question there, Lee. Thank you for that pātai, bro. Just to wrap us up, I've got just lastly, this morning we attended Te Whitu o Matariki ceremony, which refers to the 7 stars and not the 9 stars that we've been learning. What's your whakaaro about this? Do you believe there are 7, 9 stars, or a completely different number, 20 stars? What's your whakaaro?
I believe there's 1 billion stars in our sky, cuz.
Nice.
But if we are talking about that particular constellation of Matariki, this is what I was actually meaning, cuz by our whare wānanga within Te Nehenehenui, he tapu e nei kōrero, but I'll veer on to our lovely north side of it all, which was that our whare wānanga miringa was actually one of stars, okay? And I I understand it like this. There are levels to our mātauranga, okay? And as you move through, just like ngā rangi tūhaha, your view of what is far away becomes clearer, okay? So it depends on what level your journey you're on, that it will actually determine how many stars are in that cluster or constellation, which is for us like the most I know is 12.
Mm.
Okay, that I know of is 12, and that's from Maniapoto and Rereahu specific, is that there were 12, or that there are 12. Okay, but just like the name of our first atua, our our io, our first ever god, our parentless god io, that their names were tapu. Okay, and it wasn't tapu in the sense that nobody knew it. It was tapu in the sense that only tohunga would utter their name, because the utterance of those different stars names would actually bring into power, or bring into being, let's say, their power. That's how our tupuna thought. And not to get lost in the airy fairy things of what I mean by power, and that is, you have to think in traditional times, tohunga were Google. They were Google. Okay, everything that society knew and was verified was by a tohunga. Okay, so whatever they said was true. And for some people, you will hear in their kōrero, in the passing down of their knowledge, is that a specific tupuna said that there was, especially within Maniapoto, a specific tupuna of ours said there was 7 stars within Matariki. Okay, and this is in Pei Te Hurinui Jones's books. But one of those tupuna that he interviewed and told him that there were 7 stars was Kōrero, and Kōrero wrote in his book that there were 11. So that's what I mean by different level of journey. The person he was speaking to, I believe, wasn't at a level adequate to understand the power of the rest of those stars. And what I mean by that is, if you start talking about, let's say, Pohutukawa, okay? Pohutukawa is a star that is associated with mate, okay? And a lot of our people, we were not scared of death, okay? And the reason why we were not scared of death is because death was not put around us to be made scared of, if that makes sense. And that was the job of a tohunga. And keeping the sanctity of things like Pohutukawa is how they maintained that within society.
Mm.
That's just one example. There's many, because just like, yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, cuz. Tika tō kōrero. Our tupuna were and are still the OG Googles. But, they were our apps. They were the apps back in the day. They're no match for the technology we have these days. Tapping into that knowledge. So, tēnā koe mō tēnā. Finally, last one, cuz. For our whānau out there, what's one thing that you hope our whānau out there take away from your kōrero tonight?
This is always the number one thing for me, because is that our whānau come away from our kōrero empowered. Empowered to actually speak their stories, empowered to be vulnerable in this space. This is, we spoke about it earlier, because is that there's a lot of vulnerability involved in learning new knowledge, okay? Especially when this new knowledge in a perfect world is yours, and you already know, like you can already pull off. And there's also kōrero within our that I would hope that everybody takes away tonight, is that you already know everything. You truly know everything. You just need it to be activated within yourself. Our tupuna, they never ever said they were learning. They always said that things were being activated, things were being given to them. Yeah. So kei reira ke.
Kia ora, e te tuakana. Tēnei te mihi atu kia koe I tēnei pō mō kōrero o mātauranga, o taonga. Tuku iho mai tā mātou tūpuna kia mātou katoa ki te iwi o Ngāti Maniapoto rere ahu no reira. E mihi ana kia koe e te tuakana. Thank you for joining us this evening and giving us your time, spending time with us and sharing everything that you've shared with us. I know my kite is definitely full. My data is slowly getting processed now, and I'll be going back through my notes that I've got over here actually, and re-going through those. So thank you very much, e te tuakana, and no doubt, we'll get you back again. We'll have another yarn because we know we can go half the night with these yarns. so thank you again, e te tuakana, e mihi ana, e mihi ana, e mihi ana kia koe.
Tēnā koe, cuz.
Kia ora. E mihi aroha kia koutou katoa, e te whānau e matakitaki mai ana ki tō tātou kāinga I tēnei pō. Hopefully everybody is nice and warm and enjoyed the kōrero tonight, and also got to fill your fella's cup, your fella's kite, with this beautiful knowledge and kōrero and mātauranga, just like I have this evening. But it's time for us to wrap for this evening e te whānau. And I just want to wish everybody a beautiful Matariki week, and hope everybody's well and stay safe out there. But from me and the cuz, Tiriana, kia tātou katoa, mānawa tia Matariki, pai marire kia tātou katoa. O Mārie.
O Mārie.